The laughter started before Nala even reached the piano. In Tendai Mbeki's glittering ballroom, men in tailored suits smirked into their champagne glasses, while women whispered behind jeweled hands. A blind orphan girl in a faded dress had no place near a grand piano worth more than most homes in the city. But Nala kept walking, one careful step at a time. Her fingers brushed the polished edge of the instrument, and then she sat down as if she belonged there more than anyone else in that room. The mockery grew louder. Then Tendai looked up, because before a single note was played, the billionaire saw something impossible in the stillness of her face. "Before we go on, tell me this: do you believe people reveal their true hearts when they are powerful, or when they are broken? And where are you watching from tonight?" Drop your country and local time in the comments. If stories like this move you, subscribe and stay with us until the end. Nala had learned very early that pity could be louder than cruelty. At St. Dahlia Home for Children, pity wore perfume on donation days and cheap soap on ordinary ones. It smiled for photographs. It patted small heads. It promised futures it never intended to build. Then, when the cars were gone and the gates had closed again, pity became hunger silence, and orders barked down dim hallways that smelled of bleach-boiled cassava and damp cement. The orphanage stood on the edge of the city, where unfinished roads dissolved into red dust and scrub grass. From the front it looked respectable enough. Fresh paint, a blue iron gate, a hand-painted sign with a verse about kindness. But the back of the building told the truth. Cracked walls, broken window shutters, rusted gutters, a yard where children learned how to make games out of stones because toys were for visitors, not for them. Nala knew every corner of that place without seeing any of it. She knew the kitchen by the heat that pressed against her skin before dawn. She knew the hallway outside the girls' room by the loose floor tile that clicked under her heel. She knew the laundry line by the wet smell of soap and the way cloth slapped softly in the wind. She knew who was walking toward her long before they spoke. The heavy, impatient steps belonged to Mama Sade. The quick, nervous ones belonged to younger children, afraid of being late. The dragging footsteps, always just a little uneven, belonged to Io. Io was 10, thin as a reed, always hungry, always joking, always too brave for a boy who had every reason not to be. He was the only person who never spoke to Nala, as if blindness had stolen her mind too. That morning, before the charity gala that would carry Nala into Tendai Mbeki's mansion, Io found her behind the storage shed, sitting on an overturned bucket, with her face turned toward the sun. She liked mornings because the world felt honest before adults began arranging it. "You're hiding," Io said. "I'm breathing," Nala replied. He dropped down beside her. She could hear the grin in his voice. "Same thing here." She tilted her head. "You stole bread again. I borrowed it from the future. From whose future? Mine. Possibly yours if you're kind." She smiled despite herself. It came and went quickly. Smiles were dangerous at St. Dahlia. They made people ask what you thought you had to be happy about. Io tore the bread in half and pressed a piece into her hand. It was stale but warm from where he had hidden it under his shirt. "They polished the black piano again," he whispered. Nala's fingers froze around the bread. The piano. Even thinking the word felt forbidden. It lived in the locked storage room near Mama Sade's office, covered in an embroidered cloth on normal days, and rolled out only when donors visited. Then Mama Sade would tell people the children were being introduced to culture, though none of them were allowed to touch it. Not even the sighted ones. Especially not Nala. Because once, months earlier, when the building had gone quiet during a thunderstorm, and Mama Sade had forgotten to lock the room, Nala had slipped inside. She had found the piano the way she found everything else, through airspace, memory, and patience. She had touched the wood first, then the keys, cool, smooth waiting. When she pressed one, the note entered her like light might enter another person. She had stood there trembling, pressing one note after another until simple sound became shape and shape became feeling, and feeling became something too large to hold. She had not known Mama Sade was listening from the doorway. The beating that followed had taught her two things. First, Mama Sade was not angry because Nala had disobeyed. She was angry because Nala had made the piano sing. Second, some adults did not fear broken children. They feared gifted ones. Now Io lowered his voice even further. I heard Mama Sade telling the seamstress to stitch your dress tighter. She wants you to look smaller. Nala frowned. Smaller, more fragile, he corrected. More heartbreaking. That was Mama Sade's favorite kind of child. A useful one. Nala exhaled slowly. Then she has already chosen the story she wants them to see. And what story is that? That I am a sad little thing? Io nudged her shoulder. You are many things. Little is only one of them. She gave a soft laugh, but it vanished when the back door slammed open. Nala Mama Sade's voice cut across the yard like a whip. The woman always sounded dressed up even when she was furious. Her words came polished, almost sweet, until the sweetness curdled. She wore flowing kaftans in bright colors and a smile that impressed donors. She prayed loudly when visitors arrived. She cried on cue when speaking about sacrifice. Yet the children knew the truth hidden beneath her perfumes and proverbs. Kindness with Mama Sade was a costume. Nala, where are you? She called again. Here Nala answered, rising at once. Mama Sade approached with the sharp rustle of expensive fabric. She stopped close enough for Nala to smell amber oil and fresh powder on her skin. There you are. Her tone softened for show, though no visitor was present. Habit, then. I have been looking everywhere. Do you know what day this is, the gala? Yes, the most important night Saint Dahlia has had in years. She adjusted the shoulder seam of Nala's dress with brisk fingers. You will speak only when asked. You will be grateful. You will sit when told. And for heaven's sake, do not embarrass me. Nala kept her face blank. How would I embarrass you? Mama Sade paused. A small pause. But enough. By forgetting what you are there for, she said. Nala heard what was not said, not to be seen, to be displayed. Io shifted beside her. Mama Sade noticed. You, she snapped. Kitchen duty. Move. When he ran off, she leaned closer to Nala until her breath touched the girl's cheek. Listen carefully, she murmured. Important people will be there tonight. Important money. If they are pleased, this place continues. The children eat, the roof gets fixed, medicine gets bought. You would not want your stubbornness to be the reason other children suffer, would you? There it was, the holy weapon of cowards. Guilt placed in a child's hands like a burden too heavy to refuse. Nala bowed her head because resistance always made things worse in the moment. No, Mama Sade. Good girl. But after the woman walked away, Nala remained very still, and inside her something cold and quiet began to harden. She had heard versions of that speech many times. When blankets disappeared, when food ran short, when children were punished for asking questions. Always the same lesson: obey or others will pay. Be silent or you are selfish. Endure or you are ungrateful. It took children years to understand what grown-ups knew from the start. Some suffering was not an accident. Some suffering was organized. The afternoon passed in preparations. The younger girls washed Nala's hair with harsh soap that left her scalp burning. A seamstress tightened the waist of her faded cream dress until breathing too deeply hurt. Someone rubbed oil onto her shoes to make the cracked leather look new. Mama Sade rehearsed her lines in the office with the door open on purpose. Despite her disability, she remains cheerful. She has no family, poor child. We do what we can with so few resources. Nala sat on a stool in the hallway and listened. The words entered one ear and left through the other. She had stopped measuring truth by language. Adults lied most beautifully when money was near. Later, as shadows lengthened and the transport car had not yet arrived, Io slipped back to her with something wrapped in cloth. "What is it?" she asked. "A present." "For what?" "For not belonging to this place," he said. She unwrapped it slowly and touched smooth wood worn soft by many hands. A small carved bird. Its wing had been chipped, but the body was whole. "Io." "I found it months ago," he said quickly. "I was keeping it to trade for sugar one day, but you should take it, for luck." Nala ran her thumb over the broken wing. "It's damaged." "So—" She held the bird against her chest. "So am I," she whispered. "No," Io said, sudden and fierce. "You're hidden. That is different." The word struck deeper than he knew. Hidden, not broken, not useless, not cursed as some children had repeated after hearing it from staff. Hidden. Before she could answer, a horn sounded outside the gate. Mama Sade's shoes clicked rapidly down the corridor. "Nala, come." Hands guided her too quickly, too tightly. The evening air outside tasted of dust and petrol. She was placed into the back seat of a polished vehicle that smelled like leather and money. Mama Sade sat beside her, humming with excitement. During the drive, she took a call, and thinking Nala too irrelevant to matter, spoke more freely than usual. "Yes, we're on our way." "No, she doesn't know anything." "Of course not. Just make sure she performs the sympathy part before the appeal." "Performs." Nala turned her face toward the window. The city shifted around her in layers of sound. Street vendors calling, motorbikes weaving through traffic, music spilling from open kiosks. Somewhere a child laughed without fear. Somewhere a mother shouted someone home. Somewhere life was happening honestly without chandeliers or speeches. Then Mama Sade lowered her voice, but not enough. "And keep the old file locked away," she said. "I told you no one must see it." Nala's breath caught. "What file?" asked the voice on the phone, faint but male. "The girl's original intake papers." Silence. "Then you're being paranoid." "No," Mama Sade said. For the first time, real fear entered her voice. "I am being careful." The call ended. Nala said nothing. She folded both hands in her lap to stop them trembling. Original intake papers. She had always known something in her story was missing. Children came to orphanages through tragedy, abandonment, chaos. But even chaos left traces. Names, places, rumors, scraps of memory. Nala had none. Only darkness, music, and the vague scent of jasmine. She sometimes dreamed of when feverish. Now, as the vehicle slowed before iron gates and distant laughter floated through the evening air, a truth she could not yet see moved closer. Mama Sade thought tonight would make Nala useful. Instead, it was about to make her dangerous. Tendai Mbeki had built his life the way some men built fortresses. High walls guarded gates, no windows left open, long enough for grief to climb back in. By the age of 46, he was one of the most feared and admired businessmen in East Africa. Newspapers called him brilliant, ruthless visionary. His critics called him cold. His investors called him dependable. His rivals called him dangerous when they thought no microphones were near. But none of those words touched the center of him. They only described the shell he had spent 15 years perfecting. The real Tendai was buried somewhere under polished shoes, boardroom victories, and the steady ritual of never speaking his wife's name aloud. His mansion stood above the city on a rise of land lined with acacia trees and guarded by black steel gates. It was enormous without being beautiful. Every surface gleamed. Every line was clean. Every room felt arranged for admiration rather than living. Staff moved through the halls like whispers. Fresh flowers appeared each morning in tall ceramic vases. Art hung on the walls, expensive and tasteful and emotionally distant. People who visited called the house elegant. Those who knew him well called it what it was: a mausoleum with electricity. On the evening of the gala, Tendai stood alone in his dressing room while a valet adjusted the cuffs of his dark jacket. Beyond the long windows, the city flickered beneath the dusk like embers scattered across the earth. Inside, only the soft rustle of fabric and the ticking of an antique clock disturbed the silence. "Will that be all, sir?" the valet asked. "Yes." The man withdrew immediately. People around Tendai had learned that lingering invited discomfort. The billionaire disliked chatter, disliked explanation, disliked being watched too long. He had turned brevity into a weapon. One look from him could empty a room faster than a shouted order from another man. Yet tonight, for reasons he would not have admitted even to himself, he did not leave the dressing room at once. He stood before the mirror and adjusted his own cuff again, though it was already perfect. His face stared back at him, composed, controlled, older than the years he had lived. There was still strength in his shoulders, still command in the line of his mouth. But his eyes had changed. Once long ago they had carried mischief, warmth, dreams that involved more than acquisition. Now they looked like windows after a fire, intact but darkened. He turned away before memory could gain ground. In the corridor outside, Kelechi was waiting. Kelechi had worked for Tendai for 9 years, first as an operations fixer, then as a personal aide, then as the rare human being permitted to enter the billionaire's silence without immediately ruining it. He was younger than Tendai by nearly a decade, lean and sharp-eyed, with a calm that never tipped into weakness. He knew when to speak. More importantly, he knew when not to. "The donors from Lagos arrived 20 minutes ago," Kelechi said as they walked. "The education minister has confirmed. The press will remain in the front gallery only, and your cousin is already downstairs." Tendai's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Zuberi is early?" he asked. Kelechi glanced sideways. "He seems particularly eager tonight." Of course he was. Zuberi loved rooms filled with wealth he had not earned and influence he had not built. He was the kind of man who treated family ties like ladders useful only if they lifted him higher. Tall, charming, and always scented too strongly, Zuberi had an instinct for appearing helpful while quietly shifting advantage toward himself. Tendai had tolerated him for years out of family duty and old habit. Nothing more. "Keep him away from the foundation pledges," Tendai said. "I already have." They descended the staircase in silence. Below them, the mansion's great hall glowed with golden light. Staff moved between towering floral arrangements. A string quartet played near the western arch. Beyond the open doors, the ballroom buzzed with voices and the bright, artificial warmth of the wealthy, trying to appear generous in public. It was the annual charity gala for the Amara Foundation, named after Tendai's late wife. Every year, businessmen, politicians, socialites, and donors gathered under his roof to celebrate compassion while negotiating power over champagne. Every year he hosted it with flawless precision. Every year he despised it a little more. He told himself the event mattered because the foundation funded schools, clinics, and children's programs across the region. That much was true. But truth was rarely singular. The gala also served another purpose, one he never explained. It kept Amara's name alive in rooms where forgetting came too easily. As Tendai entered the ballroom, conversations subtly shifted around him. Heads turned, smiles widened. Hands reached out. He accepted greetings, shook hands, nodded where necessary. He knew how to perform command. It required no joy. Tendai magnificent as always. "A pleasure to be here. You've outdone yourself again." He gave each person exactly what the moment demanded, nothing more, nothing less. At the far end of the room stood the grand piano. Black, brilliant, untouched. Most guests assumed it was decoration, an expensive centerpiece placed to suggest culture. They did not know it had once belonged to Amara. They did not know she used to sit at it after midnight, barefoot, humming unfinished melodies while rain moved across the windows. They did not know that on the last birthday they spent together, she had written a small private lullaby for their daughter and laughed when Tendai forgot half the notes trying to learn it. No one touched that piano now. No one had touched it in years. Even the cleaning staff polished it under direct instruction and never lifted the lid. As Tendai stared at it from across the room, an old ache moved under his ribs with slow, practiced cruelty. He shut it down before it reached his throat. Brother Zuberi arrived with open arms and false warmth. Tendai accepted neither offering, only his hand. Zuberi hid disappointment behind a polished grin. "You look severe tonight," Zuberi said. "Try to frighten the donors less before dinner." "I thought you liked frightened donors," Tendai replied. Zuberi chuckled too loudly. "Only when they sign large checks." His cufflinks flashed when he lifted his glass. He was already drinking then. Early. Tendai noted it without comment. "What exactly is tonight's special attraction?" Zuberi asked. "I heard your events team found some tragic little prodigy from an orphanage. The guests do adore inspiration as long as it's brief." Tendai's gaze sharpened. "My events team?" he said. Zuberi spread a hand. "The foundation coordinators, then. One of those places you support. Saint something. The child is blind, I'm told. Perfect for the emotional segment." The words landed badly. Not because charity performances were unusual at galas like this, they were not, but because Tendai hated the staged exploitation of suffering disguised as benevolence. He funded institutions, he signed budgets, he knew the machinery, he simply preferred not to watch it too closely while it smiled for cameras. "Who approved it?" he asked. Zuberi shrugged. "I assumed you did." Tendai looked toward Kalechi, who was already crossing the room. A minute later, he returned. "The addition came through the Foundation Outreach Office this afternoon," he said quietly. "It was presented as a short musical feature from St. Dahlia Home for Children. The paperwork carries your digital approval." Tendai stopped moving. "My approval?" "Yes, that is impossible." Kalechi's expression did not change, but his voice lowered. "Then someone routed it through your access." Across the room, Zuberi laughed at something a minister had said. Too casually. Too easily. A small blade of suspicion slid into place. Tendai had learned long ago to respect anything that smelled of manipulation. Real attacks rarely announced themselves dramatically. They arrived tucked inside routine smiling as they crossed the threshold. "Remove the child from the program," he said. Kalechi hesitated. "She is already on the property." That irritated him more than it should have. Then cut the segment short. "Understood." But before Kalechi could move away, an older woman approached from the service corridor carrying a tray of glasses. Binta, the longtime head cook, was one of the few staff members unafraid of Tendai's mood. She had worked in the Mbeki household since before the business empire existed, back when Tendai and Amara were still newly married, and hope had not yet become something fragile. Age had bowed her shoulders, but not her spirit. "You are frowning at your own guests again?" she said. "Then they should stop giving me reasons," Tendai replied. Binta clicked her tongue. "A house can feel when its owner resents it. This house feels nothing." Binta shifted the tray to one hip. "That is where you are wrong." Her eyes moved briefly toward the piano. For a second, Tendai said nothing. There were people who pitied him, people who admired him, and people who wanted something from him. Binta was more dangerous than all of them because she remembered him from before he became difficult to reach. She still spoke to the man inside the armor, as though he might yet answer. "You should have removed that instrument years ago if you intended to live like a ghost," she said softly. "I intend no such thing. Then stop punishing a room for surviving." Before he could respond, she moved on, leaving him with the faint smell of cardamom and roasted meat trailing in the air. He hated when she was right. The gala swelled. Cameras flashed. Speeches began. A minister praised philanthropy. A financier praised economic courage. Zuberi praised partnership in a toast so polished it sounded rehearsed. Tendai spoke last, as expected. His remarks were brief, intelligent, forgettable by design. He thanked the guests, mentioned community impact, invoked responsibility, and returned the microphone before anyone could call the speech heartfelt. As applause faded, Kelechi stepped to his side. "There is one more complication," he said quietly. Tendai did not look at him. "Go on." The orphan girl refused to wait in the side room. That got his attention. Refused. She said she would not be hidden until people were ready to feel noble. For the first time that evening, something almost like interest touched Tendai's face. "Who told you that?" "The driver. Apparently she said it to the woman who brought her. And where is she now?" Kelechi looked toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. "They just brought her in." Tendai turned. At first he saw only the crowd parting with careless curiosity. Then the figure at its center emerged, a small girl in a plain cream dress, one hand brushing the air lightly as she oriented herself, by sound, not sight. Her chin was lifted. Her steps were cautious but not timid. Beside her walked a woman in bright fabric and anxious perfume, smiling too hard at everyone who looked their way. The room reacted exactly as rich rooms often reacted to visible suffering, with fascination disguised as concern. A few guests whispered, others leaned closer, hungry for sentiment. Somewhere near the champagne tower, someone laughed softly, not bothering to hide it. Tendai felt an unexpected flicker of disgust. At the center of the hall, the blind girl stopped. The music from the quartet had ended. The ballroom held that peculiar silence that came when people expected to be moved but had not yet decided how much. Tendai should have turned away. He should have let the segment happen, endured. It returned to the machinery of the night. Instead, he kept watching, because there was something deeply wrong about the stillness in the child's face. Not weakness, not confusion. Recognition. As if somehow in a house she had never entered, surrounded by people who would not remember her. Tomorrow she had arrived at a place meant to wound the truth out of someone. And though Tendai could not have explained why he suddenly felt the first crack of fear, not for her, for himself. For 3 long seconds no one moved. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers bright as a jewel box, but the silence inside it had changed shape. It was no longer the soft silence of wealth waiting to be entertained. It was the sharper kind, the kind that appeared when people sensed something awkward, something fragile, something they might later describe as unfortunate over dessert. Nala stood at the edge of the polished floor, with Mama Sade's fingers locked around her elbow. "Smile," Mama Sade whispered through her teeth. Nala did not. She could feel the room the way others might see it. She felt its size in the echo of shoes, its vanity in the hush that followed every expensive laugh, its cruelty in the way people breathed when they thought they were being generous simply by paying attention. The air smelled of perfume, polished wood wine, roasted meat, and cold air spilling from hidden vents high in the walls. Somewhere to the left, bracelets clinked softly when a woman folded her arms. Somewhere farther back, a man cleared his throat in bored anticipation. Someone else stifled a laugh. Nala heard all of it. And beneath it all, farther than the whispers and brighter than the chandelier hum, she felt the piano waiting. Mama Sade leaned close, her smile still fixed for the audience. When I speak, lower your head. Do not look stubborn. Look humble." Nala almost answered, then stopped herself. Blind girls were apparently not supposed to look stubborn. Blind girls were supposed to soften rooms, invite guilt, increase donations. She lowered her chin, but only enough to avoid a scene. A master of ceremonies stepped forward, all polished shoes and rehearsed compassion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before dinner is served, we have a very special presentation tonight from St. Dahlia. Home for Children, one of the institutions supported by the Amara Foundation." A ripple of approving murmurs moved through the crowd. "Please welcome little Nala," he continued, "a brave young girl who has overcome extraordinary hardship. Though she was left without parents and without sight, she still carries hope in her heart. Left without parents, without sight, hope in her heart." The audience sighed exactly where they were meant to. Nala heard the performance inside the words more clearly than anyone. Mama Sade gave her arm a careful pinch, warning her to keep still. The MC extended a hand toward the piano. "Tonight Nala will share a simple musical offering." Simple. The word almost made Nala laugh. She began walking. One step, then another. The polished floor beneath her shoes felt different from the cracked cement of St. Dahlia. Slicker, colder, too smooth. She listened for the shape of the room and followed the soft pull of open space until the piano stood before her like a dark, silent animal. Someone whispered not very quietly, "Can she even find the bench?" A few guests chuckled. Another voicemail, amused and careless. This should be painful. Nala's face remained still, but something moved inside her chest. Not fear. She knew fear. Fear was Mama Sade's footsteps outside a locked room. Fear was going to bed hungry while other children cried in their sleep. Fear was hearing adults speak softly around secrets they believed you were too small to matter in. This was not fear. This was memory hardening into resolve. She found the bench by touch, then the edge of the instrument. The piano was grander than the old upright in the locked storage room at St. Dahlia, yet the keys felt familiar beneath her fingertips, cool, smooth, full of sleeping voices. The laughter rose again when she sat. Not loud. Worse than loud. Confident. The laughter of people certain they were superior. Across the ballroom, Tendai Mbeki stood absolutely still. He had intended to watch only long enough to confirm that the segment ended quickly. He had intended to remain detached. But the moment the girl touched the piano, something about her posture unsettled him. She did not sit like a child being used for spectacle. She sat like someone arriving at the only honest place in the room. Kelechi noticed the shift in his employer's expression. "Should I stop this?" he asked quietly. Tendai did not answer at once. Nala placed both hands above the keys. The room leaned forward. Then she played. The first note did not ask permission. It cut through the ballroom so cleanly that several people visibly straightened. One woman near the front lowered her glass without realizing it. The quartet musicians exchanged a glance. A waiter froze mid-step. Then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly the polished lie of the evening began to crack. The melody was not simple. It moved with strange certainty, as though Nala were not searching for music, but remembering it. The left hand carried a low ache, steady and restrained. The right hand entered above it like light stepping into grief. The notes rose, folded, returned, then opened again into something so intimate that the guests no longer seemed sure whether they were allowed to hear it. The laughter vanished. Not faded. Vanished. Nala forgot the room almost immediately. She no longer felt chandeliers or silk or cruel amusement. She felt warmth, a woman's voice she could not fully remember, fingers brushing her hair, A lullaby hummed in pieces through fevered dreams. She had never seen faces inside those dreams, only sound and tenderness, and the unbearable sense that something precious had been taken before she knew how to keep it. So she let the music speak what memory could not. At the back of the room, Binta stopped in the doorway to the service hall, her tray held against her chest. Near the center, Zuberi's smile faltered. At the piano, Mama Sad's carefully composed expression drained of color, and Tendai felt the blood leave his face. No. His mind rejected the possibility before the melody had even completed its first turn. No. But the notes continued, each one opening a locked chamber somewhere deep inside him. He knew this music, not from a concert hall, not from any public performance, not from a recording. It belonged to a private room years ago where rain once traced silver lines down long windows and Amara laughed when he missed the timing on the final phrase. It belonged to a dim nursery, to candlelight, to a tiny child half asleep in her mother's arms. It belonged to the lullaby Amara had written for their daughter, a song that had never existed outside the walls of this house. Tendai's hand tightened around the stem of his glass until Kelechi noticed. So still he did not answer. The melody deepened. Nala's hands moved with more force now, more confidence drawing from the instrument, a sorrow too large for a child and too pure to be imitation. There were errors, but not the errors of ignorance. They were the living errors of feeling, the kind only made by someone who played from necessity, not polish. A woman in diamonds lifted trembling fingers to her lips. A businessman who had spent the last hour boasting into his phone blinked rapidly and looked away. At the piano, Nala did not know she was breaking open the center of the room. She only knew that the music had turned urgent. It wanted release. It wanted truth. It wanted someone to hear what had been buried. Halfway through, Mama Sade took one involuntary step forward. Zuberi caught it at once. He moved to her side, smile returning too quickly, and murmured, "Stand still." She did not mean to answer out loud, but fear loosened her control. She wasn't supposed to play this. Zuberi's eyes sharpened. "What did you say?" Mama Sade swallowed. "Nothing." But Kelechi, standing not far away, heard enough. His gaze flicked instantly toward Tendai. The billionaire had not moved. He looked as if a memory had taken physical form and was now strangling him in public. The final section of the piece arrived softly, almost unbearably softly. Nala's right hand returned to the opening phrase, but this time it carried no uncertainty. The melody no longer sounded like loss alone. It sounded like someone knocking gently against a locked door, certain that someone on the other side still lived. Then the last note fell. No one breathed. The silence afterward was different from the silence before. Earlier it had been expectation. Now it was shock. Nala let her hands rest on the keys a moment longer, feeling the vibration fade into wood and air. For the first time since entering the mansion, she sensed that the room had stopped judging her and begun fearing what she meant. Then, somewhere in this ballroom, a glass shattered. The sharp sound snapped everyone back into themselves. Tendai looked down. His hand was shaking. The crystal stem had broken between his fingers, and a thin line of blood slid across his palm, dark against the glittering floor. He barely seemed to notice. Every eye turned toward him. The great Tendai Mbeki, the cold man, the untouchable man, the man who never allowed emotion to survive on his face, stood with blood on his hand and tears in his eyes. No one in that room had ever seen him cry. Not once. Binta crossed herself under her breath. Kelechi took one step closer. "Sir." "What is her name?" Tendai asked. His voice was so low, Kelechi nearly missed it. "Nala," Kelechi said. Tendai stared at the girl by the piano as though language itself had become unreliable. "Nala," he repeated. At the front, the MC, desperate to restore order, forced a laugh. Well, that was unexpectedly moving. No one joined him. Mama Sade was pale now, one hand pressed tightly against her side. Zuberi recovered faster than anyone else. He strode forward with false warmth and began applauding. "Extraordinary," he said loudly. "A miracle, really. Such talent from such tragedy." A few scattered claps followed, awkward and thin. Tendai turned his head. Just turned it. That was enough to silence the room again. He did not look at Zuberi. He looked at Mama Sade, then at the girl, then back at the piano. Kelechi saw calculation, grief, disbelief, and something more dangerous beginning to gather behind Tendai's eyes. Recognition. Tendai stepped forward at last, ignoring the blood on his hand. Nala heard the movement instantly. Among all the room's shifting sounds, his footsteps were the only ones that carried no performance. Heavy measured, restrained by force rather than nature. Yet beneath that control she heard something else now, something raw, trembling, almost broken. He stopped only a few feet from the piano. Nala turned her face toward him. For a moment neither spoke. Then Tendai asked the question that changed the air between them forever. "Who taught you that song?" Nala's fingers curled lightly against the edge of the bench. "No one," she said. Tendai's voice hardened, though his eyes did not. "That is not possible." She tilted her head, listening to the pain he was trying to bury. "It came to me a long time ago," she said softly, "like a memory I was never told." The room seemed to contract. Tendai did not blink. Behind him, Zuberi's jaw tightened. Mama Sade looked as though she might faint. And in the silence that followed, Kelechi understood with sudden clarity that tonight was no longer a gala. It was the beginning of an unraveling. No one in the ballroom understood what had truly happened. They understood the surface of it, of course. A blind orphan had played beautifully. A hard man had been moved. It was the kind of dramatic accident wealthy people loved to retell later, once enough time had passed to make it feel safe. By midnight, some of them would already be reshaping the story into something simpler, something elegant, something harmless. But what had happened inside Tendai Mbeki was neither elegant nor harmless. It was violent. A sealed room in his soul had been forced open without warning, and the air rushing out of it was 15 years old. He stood before Nala with blood drying on his palm and grief rising through him like floodwater. Up close, the child looked even smaller than she had from across the room. Her dress was too tight at the shoulders. The shoes on her feet had been polished to hide their age. Her chin was lifted with that strange, quiet dignity only the deeply wounded ever seemed to possess. And still, the impossible fact remained. She had played Amara's lullaby. Not merely the melody. Not merely something similar. She had played the particular hesitation in the second phrase where Amara used to smile and start again. She had found the turn of notes at the end that Tendai himself had once called too sad only for Amara to laugh and say, "That is because love is always carrying the fear of loss inside it." No one knew that. No one. Not the press, not the foundation board, not even most of the household staff. After the crash, after the funeral, after the days of morphine signatures, condolences, and silence, Tendai had locked the piano and buried the song with the dead. "So how do you know it?" he asked again. Nala faced him, though her eyes did not focus. "I told you. No one taught me. Songs do not appear from nowhere." A flicker of discomfort passed through her face. Not fear of him, fear of not being believed. "Some things do," she said quietly. "At least for children who are missing pieces of themselves." The sentence struck him harder than it should have. Behind them, the guests still hovered in uneasy silence, sensing that the scene had slipped beyond performance into something private and dangerous. No one wanted to leave first. No one wanted to interrupt. Wealthy people had an instinct for proximity to emotional catastrophe as long as it belonged to someone else. Tendai turned without raising his voice. The program is over. That was all. Staff reacted instantly. The quartet began playing again, soft and diplomatic. Servers moved. Conversations restarted in nervous fragments. The machinery of high society struggled back to life. But the illusion had cracked. Everyone felt it. Kelechi stepped closer. "So take the child and the woman from St. Dahlia to the east sitting room," Tendai said. "No one leaves." Mama Sade's breath caught audibly. "Mr. Mbeki, if this is about her behavior, I assure you, it is not," Tendai said. His tone was polite, which made it worse. Mama Sade fell silent. Zuberi appeared at Tendai's shoulder with the smooth timing of a man who had spent his life stepping near power whenever he sensed instability. "My dear cousin," he said lightly, "surely this can wait until after the guests are settled. People are already whispering." Tendai turned his head slowly. Zuberi smiled, but only with his mouth. The two men had known each other long enough to read what others missed. Beneath Zuberi's charm, Tendai saw alertness, calculation. And beneath Tendai's stillness, Zuberi saw something he had not expected to see tonight. Obsession. "It will not wait," Tendai said. Zuberi spread his hands. "You are upset. Understandably. The girl's music reminded you of Amara. But grief can make patterns where none exist." Tendai's gaze sharpened. Interesting that Zuberi had already chosen that interpretation. Not talent, not coincidence. Grief, as though he needed to frame the moment quickly before it could become inquiry. "Did you know she would play?" Tendai asked. For one fraction of a second, Zuberi's expression stalled. Then it smoothed over. "Of course not. You were the one who mentioned her before the performance." Zuberi laughed softly. "Because I heard about the little spectacle from the outreach office. You make it sound sinister." Kelechi, standing just behind Tendai, said nothing, but he stored every word. Across the room, Nala had risen from the bench. She held herself carefully, one hand resting on the polished edge of the piano, as though drawing strength from the fading vibration in the wood. Binta had reached her first, and in defiance of every rule separating servants from guests, gently wrapped a folded linen napkin around the child's fingers. Nala frowned. "What happened?" "The piano, bitter man," Binta said dryly. That almost earned a smile. Mama Sade hurried forward and seized Nala's wrist more tightly than necessary. "Come, child." Nala flinched. Tendai saw it. The sight produced an immediate irrational anger out of all proportion to the gesture itself. A man who had built mines, negotiated hostile governments, and crushed corporate sabotage suddenly found his jaw tightening over the grip of one woman on one little wrist. "Release her," he said. Mama Sade obeyed at once. The speed of her obedience told him something too. People accustomed to innocence protested first. The guilty complied quickly, because they were always measuring danger. As Kelechi escorted Nala and Mama Sade toward the east wing, Tendai remained in the ballroom long enough to complete what duty required. He thanked the minister, reassured two major donors, dismissed the press, offered a nod to the musicians, all of it with terrifying efficiency. He moved like a man functioning under extraordinary internal strain through sheer force of habit. Binta intercepted him near the side corridor. "You are bleeding on my floor," she said. He glanced down at his palm as if seeing it for the first time. "I will survive." "That was not my concern," she replied. "My floor will also survive. You I am less sure about." He almost told her to leave it alone. Instead, he let her press a cloth into his hand. "She is not ordinary," Binta said softly. "No." Binta studied his face for a moment. "And neither is your fear." He said nothing, because giving fear a name would make it real. In the east sitting room, the atmosphere was far less polished than in the ballroom. The room was lined with bookshelves and dark, carved furniture, quieter and older than the main hall. Amara had once preferred it because it felt lived in. Tendai had not spent more than 10 minutes there in years. Now Nala sat on the edge of a velvet chair that was too deep for her small frame. Mama Sade sat beside her, spine-rigid hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Kelechi stood near the door. Binta, uninvited but immovable, had placed a tray of tea on the low table and remained by the mantel, as if daring anyone to object. Tendai entered last. When the door closed behind him, silence fell fast. "Start at the beginning," he said. Mama Sade leaned forward at once, eager to control the narrative. "Mr. Mbeki, let me first say what an honor tonight has been for St. Dahlia. Nala is a very special child. We have always done our best for her despite limited means." "The beginning," Tendai repeated. She swallowed. Nala came to St. Dahlia many years ago after a terrible accident. There was no family, no proper identification, no one willing to claim her. We took her in out of compassion. How many years? 12. 12. That number struck him like a hammer wrapped in velvet. His daughter would have been about that age when no. He would not step that far yet. "Who brought her?" he asked. Mama Sade hesitated. "A driver. Hired, I think. The details were incomplete." "You think?" She moistened her lips. "The original intake process was handled under my predecessor." "Name?" "Matron Isi. Alive none. She died 3 years ago." "Convenient." Tendai turned to Nala. His voice changed without his permission. It softened. "What do you remember before the orphanage?" Nala went very still. It was not the stillness of confusion. It was the stillness of a child approaching pain by touch. Not much she said. Sound, heat, the smell of smoke once. A woman singing. Her fingers curled around the carved arm of the chair. And someone calling me a different name, maybe. Or maybe I dreamed that. Tendai felt the room tilt. "What name?" She shook her head. "I don't know. It disappears when I try to catch it." Mama Sade jumped in too quickly. "You see trauma. Poor thing. The mind protects itself." Tendai ignored her. And the song Nala lowered her face. "I hear it when I'm sick. Or alone. Or when it rains at night. Sometimes I wake up humming it." She paused. Tonight the piano felt like it had been waiting for me. Binta crossed her arms, eyes narrowing at Mama Sade. "How often does the child play?" Tendai asked. Mama Sade answered before Nala could. "Hardly at all. We have no proper music program. Does she have access to an instrument number?" Nala spoke then. "That is not true." The room tightened. Mama Sade turned sharply. "Nala, there is a piano in the storage room," Nala said. "Old. Out of tune. Covered with cloth. I only touched it a few times." "A few," Mama Sade snapped. "You broke into a locked room." "I touched music," Nala said. "That is different." The sentence landed with more dignity than accusation, which somehow made it harsher. Kelechi watched Mama Sade carefully. Sweat had gathered at her temples despite the cool room. Tendai took a step closer. Why would a child have to break into a locked room to touch a piano? Mama Sade's composure began to fray. Because discipline matters. Because these children become difficult when they are indulged. Because talent attracts expectations we do not have resources to meet. No. That answer was too ready. Too rehearsed. 12 years, Tendai said. No family, no records, a hidden instrument, a child who somehow knows a private song from my house. He let the silence deepen. Then he asked the question he had been circling since the ballroom. "Where are her intake files?" Mama Sade froze. Not confusion, not offense. Fear. In the office archives, she said too quickly, "Bring them. They are old. Disorganized. It may take time. Bring them now." She looked at Kelechi, then at the door, calculating. And in that single betraying glance, Tendai understood two things at once. First, the file existed. Second, she did not want him to see it. Before Mama Sad could speak again, Kelechi's phone vibrated. He checked it, then lifted his eyes to Tendai. "Sir," he said carefully, "our systems team traced the digital approval used for tonight's performance request." Tendai held his gaze. "And it did not come from your office." A beat. Someone used an internal family access credential. Behind them in the corridor, footsteps stopped just outside the door. Not staff. Too confident. Too deliberate. Zuberi. Tendai did not turn. His face changed in a way that made even Binta go silent. The music tonight had awakened grief. That sentence awakened something else. War. The footsteps outside the east sitting room paused for only a second. Then the door opened, and Zuberi entered with the relaxed smile of a man who believed charm could still control the shape of the night. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. He was interrupting. He knew it, and he wanted everyone in the room to know that he knew. Tendai did not invite him to sit. Since when Tendai asked quietly, "Do you use family credentials to alter my foundation programs?" Zuberi's smile held for half a heartbeat too long. Then he gave a low chuckle, as if the question amused him. "Is that what this is about?" "Really, cousin, your staff are becoming dramatic." Kelechi stepped forward, phone still in hand. "The request was routed through a family clearance code assigned to your office." "Then your systems are sloppy," Zuberi said. "Or someone wants trouble between us." He spoke smoothly, but Nala could hear the tension hiding beneath it. She had long ago learned that voices carried more truth than words. Zuberi sounded like polished stone sliding over a crack. Mama Sade sounded worse. Her breathing had changed. It came shorter now, thinner, the kind of breathing that belonged to people trapped between two dangers and uncertain which one would strike first. Nala sat very still, her hands folded around the small carved bird Io had given her, which she had hidden in the pocket of her dress. The smooth, worn wood pressed into her palm like a promise from another life, the one where she was not displayed, questioned, or pulled by invisible currents of adult fear. Tendai took one step toward Zuberi. The room seemed to tighten around the movement. "I did not ask how it might have happened," he said. "I asked since when." Zuberi's expression cooled by a fraction. "You are upset." "I understand. The child's performance affected you. Everyone saw that. But perhaps this is not the best moment to turn suspicion into accusation." The words were reasonable. That made them dangerous. Tendai had spent half his life among liars, sophisticated enough to hide behind civility. He recognized the method instantly, soften the room question, emotion, reframe investigation as instability. Before he could reply, Binta spoke from beside the mantel. "Funny," she said. "Only guilty men rush to explain what no one has fully accused them of yet." Zuberi turned to her with brittle amusement. "I was not aware the kitchen staff had joined the family council." Binta did not blink. "And I was not aware leeches had become shareholders." Kelechi almost looked down to hide a reaction. Tendai did not. Zuberi's smile thinned. "This is beneath you," he said to Tendai. "No," Tendai answered. "What is beneath me is fraud conducted in my house." That ended the performance of politeness. For 1 second, Zuberi dropped the charm entirely. What remained was colder, smaller, and far more revealing. Nala did not need sight to feel the room shift around that silence. It was like standing near a doorway when a storm changed direction. Then Zuberi rebuilt the smile and spread his hands. Very well. Check the files. Question the staff. I have nothing to hide. At that, Mama Sade made a tiny sound. Not even a word. Just a breath gone wrong. Tendai heard it. Everyone did. He turned his head slowly toward her. You should be careful, he said. Fear is loud in quiet rooms. Mama Sade pressed trembling fingers together. Mr. Mbeki, I have served abandoned children for many years. I would never knowingly do anything against your interests. My interests? Tendai asked. The question landed like a blade wrapped in silk. For the first time, Mama Sade realized she had chosen the wrong phrase. Not the children's welfare, not the truth. His interests. She corrected herself too fast. I mean against the foundation, against the child. Tendai held her in silence until she lowered her eyes. Then he said to Kalechi, Go to St. Dahlia tonight. Bring every intake ledger, every archived file, every donor log, every payment record from the past 15 years. Nothing stays there. Mama Sade's head snapped up. Tonight? Yes. It is late. The office is locked. Some records are fragile. So is truth, Tendai said. And yet it survives rough handling better than lies do. Kalechi nodded once. I'll take 2 security staff. Zuberi gave a dismissive laugh. This is absurd. Over a child who played one sad song. It was the wrong thing to say. Nala felt the room change around Tendai again, but this time the change was deeper. The earlier shock had been grief. This was method. Calculation. The kind that made powerful men dangerous. Do you know what disturbs me most? Tendai asked. Zuberi folded his arms. Please enlighten me. That you are trying much too hard to make this small. No one spoke. The silence that followed belonged entirely to Tendai now. He turned to Nala, and when he spoke to her, his voice shifted once more, less hard, though. Strained with the effort of holding many things back. Nala, he said, I need you to answer carefully. Did anyone ever mention another name for you? She swallowed. The question reached into places she rarely touched, because touching them hurt. Sometimes, she said, when I was younger, in fever dreams maybe, a woman's voice, or maybe memory. I don't know. What name? She closed her eyes, though it changed nothing. It sounded soft. Like, she hesitated, like Mala, or Nia, or she stopped. Something had moved in her, not a full memory, just a spark. Tendai crouched slightly, not wanting his height to overwhelm her. Take your time. The room disappeared for Nala then. She no longer heard crystal or fabric or breathing adults. She heard rain, a woman humming close to her ear, warm skin, jasmine, a low male laugh from somewhere beyond the song, safety so complete it almost hurt. Then smoke, heat, hands not gentle anymore. A voice calling Amani, she whispered. The word fell into the room and shattered it. Tendai went completely still. So did Binta. Across from them, Zuberi's breath changed. Kalechi noticed immediately. Amani Tendai repeated, but the name barely resembled speech. It sounded like something dragged out of a grave. Amara had once chosen that name for their daughter in private long before the public naming ceremony they never got to hold. Amani meaning peace. She used to whisper it during the lullaby. Just the two of them. Just this house. No document had ever carried it. No charity file. No outsider could know it. Tendai rose slowly to his full height and turned toward Mama Sad. Now even she shrank from the look on his face. Tell me everything he said. She began crying at once. Some people cried from remorse. Mama Sad cried from collapse. I didn't know at first she said words breaking apart. I swear I didn't. She came with papers and money. I was told to keep the girl, to use the new name, to never ask questions. I thought it was some family scandal, some wealthy people's shame. That happens more than you know. Who told you? Tendai asked. Mama Sade shook her head violently. I can't. You can. No, you don't understand. I understand more every minute. She looked at Zuberi. Only for an instant. But it was enough. The room went cold. Zuberi straightened, anger slipping through at last. Be very careful what you imply. I imply nothing, Tendai said. She just did it for us. That frightened old woman will say anything under pressure. Mama Sade sobbed harder. You promised me it would stay buried. The sentence hung in the air like poison. Kelechi moved first, positioning himself subtly between Zuberi and the door. Zuberi saw it and laughed without humor. What is this now? Am I a prisoner in a family house? No, Tendai said. Not yet. Nala sat rigid in the velvet chair, the carved bird digging into her palm so hard it hurt. She did not understand everything, but she understood enough. The song, the hidden name, the terror in Mama Sade's voice, the way Tendai's breathing changed whenever he spoke to her, as if some deep wound inside him had started bleeding again. And beneath all that, another realization was rising. This was about her, not as performance, not as pity, as truth. She turned her face toward Tendai. Who is Amani? No one answered at first, perhaps because the answer had become too large for language. Then Binta stepped forward, tears bright in her old eyes. It was the name of a little girl, she said softly, who was loved very much. Tendai closed his eyes. For a second only. When he opened them, grief had made room for something harder. Decision. Kelechi, he said, call our legal team, wake the police commissioner if necessary, and send someone to seal St. Dahlia before dawn. No records destroyed, no staff gone, no phone calls unmonitored. Zuberi took a sharp step forward. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Tendai turned toward him fully. No, he said. I made that mistake 15 years ago when I trusted the wrong man inside my grief. The words hit like thunder. Zuberi's composure broke at last. You cannot prove anything. Then tonight will disappoint one of us. He looked back at Mama Sade. You will come with my people to the orphanage and open every room yourself. She nodded through tears, too terrified to refuse. Then Tendai faced Nala again, and his expression altered in a way that made her chest tighten. It was not certainty. Not yet. But it was no longer suspicion either. It was a man standing on the edge of a truth so painful and so miraculous that he hardly dared breathe near it. Nala, he said quietly, I am going to find out who you really are. Nala's fingers loosened around the wooden bird. For years, adults had told stories about her life as if she were not in the room. Blind orphan, poor child, burden, blessing, charity case, tragic little survivor. But this was the first time someone had spoken as if the truth of her belonged to her. Outside, somewhere beyond the lit windows, wind moved through the acacia trees. Inside, the night was no longer a gala night, nor a donor night, nor a night of polished speeches. It had become an excavation. And everyone in the room understood the same terrible thing when the buried truth finally surfaced. It would not leave anyone unchanged. By midnight, St. Dahlia Home for Children no longer belonged to silence. The orphanage gates, which by day had opened obediently for donors' delivery vans and carefully staged mercy, now stood under the glare of headlights and the hard attention of men who had come not to give, but to uncover. 2 black security vehicles rolled to a stop in the red dust outside. A third arrived minutes later carrying Kelechi Mama Sade and a legal officer from Tendai's firm, whose face suggested he had been pulled out of sleep and immediately told that sleep no longer mattered. The city beyond the orphanage had gone quiet. The roads were mostly empty. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere a radio played faintly behind closed shutters. But inside the compound, lights were clicking on one room after another as frightened staff woke to the pounding on doors and the realization that whatever web had protected them until now had started to tear. Kelechi stepped out first. He looked at the building with the expression of a man who had seen uglier places but rarely uglier masks. The front still wore its painted message of kindness. The blue gate still looked respectable under the security lamps. Yet the illusion had already begun to rot under scrutiny. Mama Sade stood beside him in a borrowed shawl, her face blotched from crying, her dignity gone in patches. She kept looking over her shoulder as though Zuberi himself might emerge from the darkness and punish her for unraveling. "Open it," Kelechi said. Her hands shook so badly she fumbled twice with the keys. When the main office door finally gave way, stale air breathed out paper dust, mildew, cheap polish. The legal officer entered with a camera and began recording each room, each cabinet, each ledger. Tendai's instructions had been clear: document everything, touch nothing without witnesses. Assumed destruction had already been attempted. It had. The first cabinet they opened held ordinary records: donation receipts, food procurement invoices, medical requests, staff rosters. Untidy but not unusual. The second cabinet told another story. Files had been recently disturbed. Several folders sat half-shoved into place. An ashtray on the desk held blackened scraps of paper, though no one in administration was supposed to smoke. A metal waste bin smelled faintly of burned glue. Someone had begun trying to erase a history and run out of time. The legal officer crouched over the bin. Someone was destroying intake papers. Mama Sade closed her eyes. Kelechi did not look at her. Names. She swallowed. Sometimes Matron Essie kept duplicate files, hidden ones, for children brought in unofficially, where her voice dropped to a whisper. Behind the scripture cabinet. He found the latch within seconds. A false panel slid aside. Behind it lay a narrow, locked drawer. When Mama Sade hesitated this time, Kelechi's tone changed. "Either you open it," he said, "or I have the lock broken in front of the police and tell them you resisted an active investigation." She opened it. Inside were 13 files bound in red string. Not many, which made them worse. Children with stories too dangerous, too profitable, or too shameful to process through ordinary channels. Hidden children. Purchased silences. Carefully misnamed lives. The legal officer photographed everything before lifting the top file. The name on the cover was not Nala. It read, "Female minor, unidentified/transfer case/visual impairment. No surname, no family notation, no place of origin." Kelechi's jaw set. Red. The officer opened the folder carefully. Several pages had been replaced over the years, but older carbon copies still clung to the back. Date of intake he began 12 years 3 months ago. Child delivered by contracted intermediary. Payment attached under private sponsorship code. He paused. "Continue," Kelechi said. "Instructions rename upon admission. No press exposure. No public adoption process, no external inquiry response without sponsor approval." Mama Sade started crying again. One of the security men muttered under his breath. Kelechi stayed frighteningly calm. "Sponsor name." The officer turned the page, then looked up slowly. "It's missing from this copy. Not missing naturally, removed. A rectangular slice had been cut from the page with surgical care." Kelechi extended his hand. "Let me see." He studied the edges, the staple holes, the ink shadows left behind on the next sheet. Years of corporate fraud investigation had taught him something simple. Liars removed names, but rarely removed shape. Enough pressure from a pen left ghosts. He angled the page under the desk lamp. There. Indentation. Not fully legible, but enough of a first letter. Enough of a second. Z. U. Behind him, Mama Sade made a choking sound. Kelechi did not react visibly. Photograph that angle. The officer obeyed. From the corridor came hurried footsteps. One of the night attendants appeared breathless and pale. Sir, the children are awake. They're frightened. Keep them in the dormitory for now, Kelechi said. No one speaks to them without recording it. The attendant nodded and retreated. Kelechi looked back at the file. Beneath the intake sheet lay something else, an early medical report from a private clinic. Severe ocular trauma following vehicular fire. Partial burns treated. Child stabilized, then transferred. Transferred by whom? The signature line had been blacked out, but another page tucked deeper had escaped the cleanup. A handwritten note on old stationery from Matron Essie to Mama Sade after the change in leadership. Keep the girl quiet. She responds strongly to music. Do not allow visitors unsupervised access. The sponsor believes memory may return through familiar stimulus. The room went still. Not allow visitors unsupervised access. Memory may return. This had never been simple concealment. It had been management. Someone had not merely hidden a child. Someone had feared what the child might remember. Kelechi took out his phone and called Tendai directly. Back at the mansion, Tendai had not gone to bed. He stood in Amara's old sitting room with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled, and the blood from his cut finally cleaned away. Nala was asleep 2 doors down in a guest room Binta had prepared, though asleep was perhaps too generous a word. She had drifted in and out of exhausted silence, clutching a wooden bird to her chest, while Binta sat nearby like a sentry from another age. Tendai himself had not trusted sleep since the night of the crash. Tonight he trusted it even less. When Kelechi's call came, he answered on the first ring. What did you find? Kelechi did not waste a word. A hidden drawer. Multiple off-record child files. Nala has a concealed intake file under an unidentified transfer case. Renamed on admission. Privately sponsored. Instructions to suppress inquiry. Tendai's hand tightened around the phone. And the sponsor. Cut out of the main page. But the pressure marks suggest a name beginning with Zayu. Silence. Then Tendai said very quietly, Go on. There's more. Medical records confirm her blindness followed a vehicle fire, and a note from the former matron says she responded strongly to music. It specifically warns staff that memory could return through familiar stimulus. Tendai closed his eyes. For one moment the room disappeared, and he was back in smoke and glass and screaming metal. Back in the impossible hours when men had kept telling him his wife was gone, and his daughter was gone, and he had believed them because grief can make official lies feel merciful. What about witnesses, he asked. We have one living staff member ready to talk, Kelechi said. Old groundskeeper. Says he handled a private delivery 12 years ago. He was told the child came from a family matter, and that money would keep the place afloat if questions died young. Record everything. I already am. And the police on their way. Tendai lowered the phone slowly after the call ended. Across the room, Binta stood in the doorway holding a tray he had no intention of touching. She did not ask what Kelechi had found. She only looked at his face and understood enough. It is him, then, she said. Tendai did not answer directly. Zuberi had access after the crash, he said. He handled transport, contacts, family communications. I was not in a state to verify anything. Binta's mouth hardened. You were shattered. He was opportunistic. Those are not the same sin. He laughed once without humor. They feel related tonight. Binta set the tray down. No. One is pain. The other is evil. He turned away from her because she had once again named the thing too plainly. At St. Dahlia, the old groundskeeper was found in a back room near the generator shed, wrapped in a blanket and smelling of paraffin and age. His name was Baba Kojo. He had worked there long enough to know where the walls were thin and where secrets seeped through. At first he denied everything. Then Kelechi placed the hidden file on the table in front of him. Then he denied more weakly. Then the police arrived. And finally, Baba Kojo broke. I never touched the child, he said, voice trembling. I swear on my mother's grave, I only opened the gate. For whom? Asked the legal officer. A man from the city, rich shoes, family car. He came before dawn with the matron. The child was burned half-conscious, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like smoke and medicine. Baba Kojo rubbed both hands over his face. He said she had no one, said she must never be linked back, said the sponsor would protect the home forever if we cooperated. Did you know the man's name? Kelechi asked. Kojo hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. Say it, Mr. Zuberi. Even with recording devices present, even with police officers in the doorway, the name seemed to poison the air. Mama Sade began sobbing openly now, but no one pitied her. Not tonight. Kojo went on, words spilling faster, as though confession itself had become relief. He came twice after that, once with new papers, once with more money. He said the girl had to stay ordinary, hidden, unremarkable. No school visitors alone, no music lessons, no newspapers, no adoption. He looked up, fear and shame mixing in his old eyes. He was afraid someone would see something in her face. Kelechi thought immediately of Tendai's expression in the ballroom. Yes, someone had seen something, and once seen, it could never again be hidden. Back at the mansion, Tendai did not speak for a long time after hearing Baba Kojo's recorded statement forwarded to his phone. He simply stood in the darkened room while the city flickered beyond the windows and the house held its breath around him. Zuberi. Not suspicion now, not theory, not grief searching for patterns. Zuberi. The cousin who had clasped his shoulder at the funeral. The cousin who had urged him to stop searching after 2 weeks. The cousin who had said with well-timed tears, "You must let the dead go, Tendai, or they will take the living with them." But the dead had not taken the living. The living had stolen the living. Tendai set the phone down with terrifying care. Then he walked to the bar, poured a drink, stared at it, and emptied it into the sink. He wanted fury. It was there. He wanted vengeance. It was there too. But beneath both stood something even more dangerous. Clarity. For 15 years he had believed fate had mutilated his life. Now he understood that a man had done it. A man with a name, a face, a voice he had allowed near his table. A man who had watched him grieve and called it weakness while profiting from the ruin. Kelechi called again at 2:13 a.m. There's one more thing, he said. Tendai listened. In the hidden ledger, Kelechi continued, there are yearly payments routed through shell donors to St. Dahlia. Same origin pattern as several of Zuberi's side holdings. He financed her concealment all this time. Tendai looked toward the guest room where Nala slept. All this time. Not abandonment, not accident, not bureaucratic loss. Maintenance. Someone had built a cage around his daughter and paid to keep it standing. Bring every document, Tendai said. I'm leaving now. And Kelechi. Yes, sir. When you return, send word to Zuberi that I want him here at sunrise. A pause. Understood. Tendai ended the call and stood alone in the hush that followed. From down the corridor came a faint sound, soft, uneven, almost a hum. Nala half asleep, breathing against a melody that had once belonged only to Amara's arms. That sound did what rage could not. It broke him again. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough for one tear to fall, then another. And when he finally lifted his head, the grief in his face had become something colder and far more final. By morning, the man who had betrayed his family would no longer be dealing with mourning. He would be dealing with judgment. Dawn came quietly to the Mbeki estate, but nothing inside the house was quiet anymore. The sky beyond the tall windows had only just begun to pale when Tendai entered the private study with a stack of files under one arm and a storm held tightly behind his face. The room smelled of leather, old paper, cedar polish, and the bitter remains of a night that had not been slept through. He had changed clothes, shaved, and buttoned a fresh shirt, as if routine might make him feel like the man he had been yesterday. It did not. Yesterday, grief had still contained uncertainty. Today, grief had teeth. Kelechi stood near the desk, exhausted but precise, sorting documents into careful piles. Police copies, original files, financial trails, witness statements, photographs from St. Dahlia. A map of shell companies leading one by one back toward Zuberi's private holdings. Every page was another nail in the coffin of innocence. Binta stood by the hearth with folded arms. She had refused rest, refused tea, refused reason. Her face carried the hard sorrow of a woman who had watched other people's sins spill into the lives of children for too many years. "Has he arrived?" Tendai asked. Kelechi checked his watch. "Not yet." "He'll come," Binta said. "Men like Zuberi always come when they still believe they can talk their way out." Tendai said nothing. His eyes had already moved to the last document in the pile. It was not the most official one, not the one stamped by police, nor the one signed by witnesses. It was a medical summary prepared before sunrise by a discreet doctor Kelechi trusted. The doctor had compared the old trauma records from St. Dahlia's hidden file against archived hospital data from the night of the crash 15 years earlier. The language was clinical. The meaning was devastating. Female child presumed deceased in original incident likely survived with ocular trauma consistent with heat exposure and secondary injury during vehicular fire. Estimated age at time of injury matches subject currently known as Nala. Presumed deceased. Likely survived. Matches subject. The sentence should have brought relief. It did bring relief. But relief was tangled with something much harder to endure. Because if Nala had survived, then Tendai had not merely lost a daughter. He had failed to find one. No amount of deceit from others could fully soften that blade. Men had lied to him, yes. They had manipulated records, hidden witnesses, moved money, buried truth. But there had still been a little girl alive in the world while he stood at podiums, signed papers, built companies, and convinced himself that mourning was the only form of love left available to him. Somewhere in that same city, his daughter had gone hungry. She had been beaten. She had learned not to ask too many questions because adults punished children for wanting the truth. And he had not known. He pressed the heel of one hand against the desk hard enough to whiten his knuckles. A knock came at the door. "Enter," Kelechi said. One of the house staff stepped in. "Sir, the child is awake." Tendai lifted his head too quickly. Binta noticed. "Eat something first," she said. "No. You cannot go to her looking like death in a tie." Tendai almost snapped back. Instead, he exhaled once sharply. "Has she asked for me?" The staff member hesitated. She asked where she is, and whether the old woman with the kind voice is still nearby. Binta gave a grim little nod. "That would be me." Tendai dismissed the staff member, then remained where he was. He wanted to go to Nala at once. He wanted to wait until the evidence was absolute. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to tell her nothing until the danger was past. The conflict inside him was unbearable in its simplicity. A father had awakened in him overnight, but the man who had survived 15 years without that fatherhood still distrusted hope, as though it were a trap. Kelechi saw it. "She deserves truth," he said quietly. "She deserves certainty." Tendai answered. Kelechi did not argue. "Then you nearly have it." Nearly. The cruelest word in the language. Another knock came. This time the servant did not wait for permission to speak. "Mr. Zuberi is here." The study went still. Tendai did not sit. "Bring him." A moment later Zuberi entered, dressed in impeccable mourning linen, smelling of cologne and composure. If anyone had seen him from the hallway, they might have mistaken him for a guest arriving to discuss investments over breakfast. But his eyes were bloodshot, and beneath his smooth demeanor lived the unmistakable tension of a man who understood that performance alone might not save him now. He looked first at Tendai, then at Kelechi, then at the files spread across the desk. His smile came slowly. So he said, "We are doing this in daylight now." Binta let out a short, disgusted breath. Tendai ignored it. "Close the door," he said. Zuberi did. When he turned back, Tendai picked up the hidden intake file and dropped it onto the desk between them. The girl Tendai said was brought to St. Dahlia under false papers. Renamed, privately concealed, her records were altered. The sponsorship payments traced to your holdings. An eyewitness places you there the morning she arrived. You may begin with the lie you think will serve you best. Zuberi did not reach for the file. Interesting. An innocent man would have looked. A guilty one already knew the contents. "You are angry," Zuberi said, "and grief is making you dangerous." Tendai's face did not move. "Try again." Zuberi's gaze flicked toward Kelechi. "You really mean to let staff and servants sit in judgment over blood family?" Binta's answer came before anyone else's. "Blood family does not usually sell children into darkness." That landed. For the first time, genuine fury crossed Zuberi's face. But Tendai stayed fixed silent, forcing him to feel the absence of rescue. Finally, Zuberi laughed once, though nothing in the room invited laughter. "You want the truth," he said. "Fine. The truth is that I saved what could be saved." Kelechi's expression sharpened. Tendai said very quietly, "Explain." "The crash was chaos," Zuberi said. "Your car was on fire. Amara was gone. You were barely conscious. The child—" He stopped, then shrugged. "The child was damaged." The word hit Tendai like an insult flung at a grave. "She was blind," Zuberi continued. "Burned, screaming. You were broken already. Your company was unstable. Your enemies were circling. Do you know what would have happened if word got out that the Mbeki heir survived crippled and half dead? The vultures would have torn through everything." Binta took a step forward in horror. "You monstrous," Tendai lifted one hand slightly. She stopped. Not because his authority compelled her, because the look on his face did. Zuberi mistook the silence for an opening and kept going. "I made a practical decision," he said. "A necessary one. She would have become a burden you could not carry, a reminder you would drown in. So I arranged care, quiet care, paid for it generously. She lived, didn't she?" The room itself seemed to recoil. Kelechi's voice came out colder than metal. "You hid a child from her father for 15 years? I protected an empire," Zuberi snapped. "An empire I helped keep standing while he drank himself numb and buried himself in memorial speeches." Tendai crossed the space between them so quickly that even Kelechi tensed. He did not strike Zuberi. Somehow that was more frightening. He stopped inches away, and when he spoke, every word sounded carved. "You did not protect me." Zuberi held his ground, but only just. "You protected your access," Tendai said. "Your influence, your future claims. You looked at a wounded child and saw a complication to be removed. She was useless to the succession. The words escaped before Zuberi could stop them. Silence detonated. There it was. The naked truth. Not mercy. Not strategy. Not family preservation. Greed. He had stolen a child because he thought blindness made her unworthy of inheritance. Binta closed her eyes as if in prayer or rage. Kelechi did not blink. Tendai seemed to become stiller than a living man should be. Then the study door opened. No one had heard the approach. Nala stood there, barefoot, pale, one hand on the doorframe. The carved wooden bird was in her other hand. She had heard enough. Her face was turned toward the voices, not the people, but the shock in her expression cut through the room like glass. She did not understand every legal detail, every financial scheme, every old betrayal. She did not need to. Children understood the sentence hidden inside adult cruelty faster than adults imagined. You were hidden because someone decided your brokenness made you less worthy of love. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Tendai turned. Whatever Zuberi had become, whatever war had awakened in the study, it all changed the moment Tendai looked at Nala in the doorway. He saw not a symbol, not a possibility, not the heir Zuberi had feared. He saw a child trying not to break in front of strangers. Nala, he said softly. Her lips parted. He said, Heir. No one answered. She swallowed. Why would he say that Tendai began walking toward her slowly, as if approaching something wounded and sacred? Because he is a liar. Then why does his voice sound like truth? That question nearly finished him. He stopped only when he was close enough to hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing. She was trembling, not dramatically, just enough for him to know how much strength it was costing her to remain standing. There is something I need to tell you, he said. His voice failed on the last word. He forced it steady again. I was waiting for every final proof, but maybe that was for me, not for you. Nala's fingers tightened around the wooden bird. Tendai dropped to one knee before her. The most feared businessman in the region, the man who had reduced ministers to silence and competitors to rubble, knelt before a blind orphan girl with tears already gathering again in his eyes. When my wife was alive, he said we had a daughter. Very small, very loved. She was lost to me after the crash. I was told she died. Behind him, Zuberi made a sharp movement, perhaps to interrupt, perhaps to retreat. Kelechi blocked him instantly. Tendai never looked away from Nala. But she did not die, he said. She lived. She was taken, hidden, renamed. His voice shook now, impossible to stop. And Nala, every piece of truth we have found points to only one thing. Nala's mouth trembled. He could hear her trying to hold her breath still. Tendai lifted a hand, then hesitated before touching her. You are that little girl. The room disappeared. For Nala, the words did not arrive as understanding at first. They arrived as heat, sound, a door inside her mind swinging open too fast, a woman humming in jasmine-scented darkness. Strong arms, rain at the window, a deep male laugh. The name whispered against her hair. Amani. Her knees weakened. Tendai caught her. Not elegantly, not carefully, desperately. She clutched his shirt front with both hands, the carved bird trapped between them, and the first sob that escaped her was small, almost disbelieving. The second tore through her. No, she cried. No, no. Why would anyone I know? Tendai's arms closed around her. I know, but he did not know. Not fully. He had known boardroom betrayal, market ambushes, the death of love, the violence of loss. He had not known the sound a daughter makes when she learns she was not abandoned by fate, but stolen by greed. Behind them, Binta was crying openly now. Kelechi looked away out of respect for something too intimate to witness directly. Zuberi stood trapped in the room with the ruin he had made staring back at him. Nala pulled back just enough to speak, her face wet, her voice shattered. "You're my father." Tendai broke then. Not in pieces, in truth. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I am." For a long moment the world narrowed to that answer, and when Nala collapsed into him again, no longer resisting the impossible warmth of recognition, Tendai held her with the ferocity of a man trying to embrace 15 lost years all at once. In the silence that followed her sobs, one fact stood brighter and more terrible than everything else. Nala had not found a fortune. She had found the shape of the love stolen from her. And in the same moment, Tendai had not merely recovered a daughter. He had discovered the full cost of the betrayal that had hollowed his life. The house did not return to normal after the truth came out. It could not. Some revelations exploded. Others kept burning long after the sound was gone. This one did both. By late morning, the Mbeki estate had split into two worlds. In one world, lawyers were arriving through the side entrance. Police officers were reviewing statements, and Zuberi was being kept under watch in the study, with every door monitored and every phone removed. In that world, language became cold and procedural fraud, unlawful concealment, obstruction, falsified records, criminal conspiracy. In the other world, far quieter and infinitely more fragile, a father sat with a daughter who had only just learned that grief had lied to both of them for 15 years. Nala was in the sunroom now. Binta had chosen it deliberately. The room faced the eastern garden and filled with warmth by mid-morning. Cushioned chairs stood beneath tall glass panels. Potted palms softened the corners. Somewhere beyond the doors, water slipped gently through a stone fountain. It was the least intimidating room in the house, and even that still felt too grand for a child who had grown up flinching at raised voices and locked cabinets. Nala sat curled into the corner of a sofa, barefoot, still clutching Ayo's carved bird. Tendai sat opposite her at first, then realized distance felt like punishment, and moved to the chair beside the window instead, near enough to reach her, far enough not to crowd her. Neither knew how to begin. This Tendai discovered was far more terrifying than confronting Zuberi. He could dismantle companies without blinking. He could outweight ministers, outthink rivals, outspend enemies. But none of that taught a man how to speak to a little girl whose childhood had been stolen while he mourned her as dead. Binta poured tea into cups no one touched, then quietly left them alone. For several minutes only the fountain spoke. Finally, Nala said, "Did my mother really sing that song?" Tendai closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." The answer came easier than he expected, not because it hurt less, because truth once begun had a strange momentum of its own. "She sang it when you were restless," he said, "or when rain made you cry at night. She used to say storms frightened children because they sounded like giant doors closing in the sky." A tiny crease formed between Nala's brows. "That sounds like something I remember. It might be." He dared a glance toward her. Her face was turned slightly toward him, listening in the deep, complete way blind children often did when every word mattered. "She smelled like jasmine," Nala whispered. Tendai's throat tightened. "Yes, and warm oil for her hair." "Yes." Nala lowered her face. "Then I'm not making it up." "No," he said more fiercely than intended. "You are not making any of it up." Something in her shoulders loosened at that. Only a little, but enough for him to see how much of her life had been spent defending her own memories from adults who preferred convenient lies. After another silence, she asked the question he had known was coming. "Why didn't you find me?" There it was. No accusation in the tone, no drama. Just the raw, unbearable question at the center of everything. Tendai did not answer quickly because speed would have been cowardice. When the crash happened, he said slowly, "I was badly injured." "Your mother." His voice caught, but he forced it onward. "Your mother died that night. I was told you died too." Nala's fingers moved over the broken wing of the wooden bird. "I searched at first," he continued. "Not enough. Not long enough. I trusted people I should not have trusted. I let grief make me weak in the places that mattered most." Nala's head tilted. "Weak? You don't sound weak." He gave a humorless breath that was not quite a laugh. "That is because weakness can dress itself up as silence and discipline. It can look like control when it is really surrender." She considered that, then said quietly, "Mama Sade always said crying made people useless." Tendai stared at the floor for a moment before looking back up. She lied. Nala nodded once, as though storing the correction away. The late morning light warmed the glass around them. Outside, birds moved somewhere in the garden. Far away in another part of the estate, footsteps crossed marble and a door shut firmly. The legal world continued. But here the emotional world remained hesitant, almost sacred in its awkwardness. Tendai leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "There is more you deserve to know," he said. "Your mother's name was Amara. She was brighter than this house, braver than I was. She believed tenderness was a form of strength. I used to argue with her about that. What did she say? That I would understand. One day," he said. Nala's mouth twitched faintly, almost a smile. Was she right? He looked at her and did not protect himself from the answer. "Yes." The faint, almost smile vanished, replaced by something sadder. "I don't remember her face." "You do not have to," he said at once. "Memory does not only live in faces." She touched her own temple. "Sometimes it feels like there's a door here. Like if I push it too hard, everything behind it will hurt. That may be true. Then maybe I don't want all of it back." He exhaled slowly. "That is allowed." Nala turned toward the window, toward the warmth she could feel, but not see. "At the orphanage," she said, "I used to imagine my parents in different ways, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, sometimes dead, sometimes rich enough to forget me." Her throat tightened. "I never imagined this." Tendai waited. "When I found out you were my father," she whispered, "part of me was happy, and part of me hated you for 1 second." He absorbed that without flinching. "You are allowed that too." Her head turned sharply toward him, startled. Most adults demanded forgiveness before truth had even settled. He did not. "I should have protected you," he said. "Whether I knew where you were or not, that remains true." Nala's breathing went uneven again. "Do you still want me now that you know what happened to me?" The question hollowed the room. Tendai did not merely answer it. He moved. Slowly, carefully, he left his chair and knelt in front of her sofa, not touching her until she gave the smallest nod that she knew he could not see but somehow felt anyway. Then he placed one hand lightly over hers and said, "Nala, there is nothing in what happened to you that could make me want you less." She trembled. He continued, voice rough. "Not your blindness, not the lost years, not the pain, none of it. You were wanted before you could speak. You were loved before you could walk. And you are loved now." The last sentence broke something open in her. Nala bowed forward, shoulders shaking, and Tendai reached for her carefully this time, letting her choose the distance. She crossed it herself and folded into him, smaller than any child should feel, fiercer than any child should have had to become. He held her until the sobs quieted. When she finally leaned back, her face wet, she asked in a fractured whisper, "Then why does it feel scary?" "Because love returned after betrayal," he said. "And that makes the heart suspicious." She breathed that in as if testing whether it fit. It did. A while later, after Binta brought food and successfully bullied them into eating some of it, another practical pain surfaced. Nala said suddenly. Tendai looked up at once. "Your friend? He's still there. At St. Dahlia." The thought hit him with fresh shame. In the enormity of discovering Nala, there were still other children in that place. Other children who had slept under the rule of fear while wealthy people gave speeches about compassion. "He won't know where I've gone," Nala said. "He'll think I left." "You did leave." Her hand tightened. "Not like that." Tendai understood immediately. To disappear without a word was a wound children from orphanages carried for years. Vanishing was how adults behaved when they had the power to choose. "I'll send for him," Tendai said. Nala turned sharply toward his voice. "Really? Yes." "And the others?" The question broadened the room again, bringing the moral weight back into focus. This was no longer only about one child's rescue. Justice that saved one and abandoned the rest was only vanity dressed as virtue. Tendai sat back slowly. "The police have sealed St. Dahlia," he said. "No child will remain under Mama Sade's control. Temporary emergency care is being arranged. By tonight, the authorities and my foundation will place every child somewhere safe." Nala listened, but he sensed her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked. "You said your foundation." She lowered her head. "Will people still have to perform sadness to deserve help?" The question cut deeper than any courtroom accusation could have. Tendai had spent years funding institutions without looking too closely at the theater of suffering they often required. Not because he approved, because distance made it easier to function, easier to donate, sign, move on, and call that duty. Now his daughter had named the rot at the center of that entire system with one quiet sentence. "No," he said, one word, but it carried the weight of vow. Then more slowly, "Not while I have anything to do with it." Nala leaned back into the sofa, exhausted by feeling. For a while they said little. Tendai told her small, safe things when the silence grew too sharp. How Amara used to laugh at formal dinners. How the garden had once been full of marigolds. How Nala as a baby had hated being swaddled and always kicked one foot free no matter how tightly the blankets were wrapped. That last detail made her laugh through her tears. "A difficult child," Tendai said. "A stubborn one." Yes. The laughter faded, but it left something important behind, ease, fragile and new. Then footsteps approached. Kelechi paused at the threshold. "I'm sorry to interrupt." Tendai rose at once. "What is it? Zuberi's lawyer has arrived. He's demanding release pending formal charges." Tendai's face hardened instantly. Nala heard the change in his breathing. "Is he leaving?" "No," Tendai said. Then he looked at her, and for the first time since morning, his next decision became clear, not as revenge, but as responsibility. He could not undo the years. He could not give Nala back the sight stolen by fire or the childhood stolen by greed. But he could do one thing completely. He could choose finally and without hesitation whom he would protect. He knelt before her again, just briefly this time. "I need to deal with him," he said. "But I do not want to leave you wondering whether I'm coming back." Nala's fingers found the sleeve of his shirt. "Are you—" He covered her hand with his own. "Yes," he said, "I am coming back." Something in her face changed, not healed, not fully trusting yet, but willing to believe 1 inch further than before. That inch mattered. As Tendai stood and turned toward the door, The man who crossed the threshold was no longer merely a billionaire confronting a criminal relative. He was a father walking toward judgment with his daughter's trust freshly placed, trembling and unfinished in his hands. And for the first time in 15 years, he knew exactly which kind of man he had to be. By afternoon, the Mbeki estate had become a courtroom without a judge. The formal legal system was already moving. Police had taken statements. Financial investigators were tracing shell accounts. St. Dahlia had been sealed, its staff divided between witnesses, suspects, and those too frightened to understand which they were. But inside Tendai's house, something older than law and sharper than procedure was unfolding. Truth had reached the point where it no longer needed discovery. It needed consequence. Zuberi sat in the same private study, where he had once entered smiling, certain that blood ties and practiced charm could bend reality back into his favor. He no longer smiled now. His lawyer sat beside him, briefcase open, voice clipped already, trying to reduce betrayal into technicalities. "My client denies criminal intent," the lawyer said. "At most, we are dealing with a tragic series of protective decisions made during a period of confusion after a major accident." Tendai remained standing behind the desk, one hand resting on the hidden file that had undone everything. Kelechi stood near the door. 2 plainclothes officers waited outside. Binta, by some natural law beyond anyone's authority, had once again inserted herself into the room and stood by the shelf with her arms folded like judgment given human form. "Protective," Tendai repeated. The lawyer cleared his throat. "The child was injured. Mr. Zuberi believed the child," Tendai said more quietly, "has a name." No one interrupted. "She had a name when she was born," he continued. "She had a name when she was stolen. She had a name when she was hidden in that place and taught to shrink herself for other people's comfort." His eyes shifted to Zuberi. "And she has a name now." Zuberi leaned forward, tension running beneath his polished stillness. "You are making this emotional on purpose." Tendai looked at him with something colder than rage. "You made it emotional when you stole a child from her dying mother's memory." That landed harder than shouting would have. The lawyer tried again. "Mr. Mbeki, whatever happened years ago, we must focus on provable conduct." "Excellent," said Tendai. "Let us focus on provable conduct." He nodded to Kelechi, who set a folder on the desk and opened it. "Provable conduct," Tendai said, "includes concealed payments to St. Dahlia through 3 shell donor networks linked to Zuberi and Lovu Holdings. It includes false sponsorship authorizations. It includes witness testimony, placing Mr. Zuberi at the transfer site of an injured minor. It includes instructions to suppress adoption, suppress exposure, and suppress musical training because memory might return through familiar stimulus." The lawyer's face changed slightly at that last phrase. He had not known everything. "Good." Tendai stepped around the desk. "Would you like more?" he asked. "We also have your client's own words from this morning. He stated in front of witnesses that my daughter was useless to the succession." The lawyer turned sharply toward Zuberi. For the first time, Zuberi looked cornered rather than calculating. "I was provoked," he snapped. "No," Binta said. "You were revealed." The lawyer shut his eyes briefly, perhaps calculating how much distance still remained between defense and disaster. Zuberi rose then, unable to tolerate the posture of the accused any longer. "Enough," he said. "Enough of this moral theater. Fine. I did what I did. I made the choice, and I would make it again." Silence followed. Even the air seemed to recoil. "You think this makes you noble," he said to Tendai. "Look at yourself. You were already disappearing after Amara died. Your company was vulnerable, your bored, restless, your mind half buried with your wife. A blind child heir would have destroyed what remained. I did what someone had to do." Tendai's expression did not flicker. Zuberi mistook that calm for permission to continue. I kept your empire intact, he said. I preserved the family name. I prevented scavengers from circling. You should be thanking me for making the hard decision you were too broken to make. The room had passed beyond anger now. Anger belonged to ordinary betrayal. This was something uglier. Tendai took another step closer. You did not make a hard decision, he said. You made an easy one for yourself and called it strategy. Zuberi scoffed. Words. No. Truth. Tendai's voice hardened. A hard decision would have been saving her and standing beside her, raising her, defending her, letting the world see that injury does not erase worth. Instead, you hid her because you thought blindness made her less human and less useful. Zuberi said nothing, because there was nothing left to hide behind. At that moment, a soft knock came at the door. Everyone turned. Binta frowned. Now, who but Tendai already knew? Let her in, he said. Nala entered slowly, guided only by the memory of the hallway and the fountain sounds she had counted on the way. She wore one of the simpler dresses Binta had found for her in the guest wing. Clean, soft, still unfamiliar. Her hair had been gently combed back. She carried no fear in her face now, only exhaustion, quiet hurt, and a steadiness that made the adults in the room look smaller than they were. Nala Tendai said at once, stepping toward her. You don't need to be here. I know, she replied, but I want to be. The lawyer opened his mouth perhaps to object to a child being present during legal confrontation. One look from Binta silenced him before Tendai even had to speak. Nala turned her face toward the center of the room. Is he here? She asked. Yes, Tendai said. She nodded once. Then to Zuberi. I heard enough before, but I wanted to hear the rest with my own ears. Zuberi stared at her. Perhaps for the first time in years, he was forced to look not at a problem he had concealed, but at the living person who had survived his decision. Nala's voice was small, but it did not shake. Did you ever come to see me? She asked. He said nothing. Did you ever hear me crying? She continued. Did you ever know when I was hungry or sick or afraid? Still nothing. Nala drew a breath that sounded too heavy for her small chest. Then don't say you protected anything. The words entered the room like clean light. Not loud, not dramatic, final. Zuberi looked away first. That more than all the evidence revealed his cowardice. He could justify his greed. He could intellectualize cruelty. He could dress theft in the language of power. But he could not look into the face of the child he had hidden and repeat those lies without feeling what he was. Small. Tendai laid one hand lightly at Nala's shoulder, not to move her, to stand with her. Then he turned to the officers at the door. You have everything you need, he said. The older officer nodded. We do. He stepped inside with his partner. The lawyer began protesting immediately procedure timing jurisdiction, but his words had already lost their force. One officer read out the charges while the other moved toward Zuberi. Fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, unlawful concealment of a minor, financial crimes, possible further charges pending. Zuberi looked at Tendai one last time. You think this ends with me taken in handcuffs, and you made whole again? Tendai's answer came without hesitation. No, he said. Nothing makes us whole again. Justice is not repair. It is simply the refusal to let evil keep speaking as if it won. The officers escorted Zuberi out. He did not resist dramatically. Men like him rarely did once the room had fully turned against them. He only straightened his cuffs and tried to preserve dignity on the walk toward disgrace. No one offered him any. When the door closed behind him, the silence that remained was unlike any silence the house had held before. It was not grief, not suspense, not fear. Release, not complete release. Nothing so simple. But the first honest breath after years of poisoned air. Nala swayed slightly. Tendai crouched immediately. "Are you all right?" "I'm tired," she admitted. "That is reasonable." Her fingers found the sleeve of his shirt. "Is it over?" He thought carefully before answering. "The worst part is over." She seemed to accept that. Binta stepped forward and touched Nala's hair with grandmotherly tenderness. "And the rest, little one, we do slowly. Slowly." The word changed everything, because the next hours were no longer about exposure. They were about building. That evening, Tendai gathered his legal team foundation board and emergency social services partners in the Great Hall, the same hall where Nala had been laughed at less than a day ago. The chandeliers still shone. The piano still stood at the center. But the meaning of the room had changed. No speeches for donors this time. Only decisions. St. Dahlia would be permanently shut down. Every child there would be transferred into protected, independently supervised housing by morning. Medical care education review, trauma counseling, and legal advocacy would be funded in full. Mama Sadeh and all complicit staff would face prosecution where evidence supported it. The foundation would undergo a total audit. Performance-based charity events involving vulnerable children would end immediately. And then Tendai made one more announcement. The Amara Foundation would be rebuilt not as a stage for pity, but as a network of schools, music centers, and safe homes for children who had been hidden, discarded, or underestimated. The first new center would open on the grounds of St. Dahlia after the old buildings were demolished and replaced. Its name would be the Amara and Nala Institute for Music and Dignity. When he said the name aloud, Nala's head lifted. For a second, emotion moved across her face too quickly to name grief. Surprise, disbelief, then something softer. Later, after the staff and lawyers had dispersed, after the officers had gone, after even Binta had reluctantly allowed herself to sit down, Tendai led Nala back into the ballroom. The room was empty now. Night lay against the windows in deep blue sheets. The chandeliers were dimmed. The grand piano stood beneath a circle of gold light. Nala heard it before she reached it, the waiting hush around polished wood. "Do you want to play?" Tendai asked. She smiled faintly. "Yes." He guided her to the bench, then stopped. This time, no one introduced her. No one displayed her. No one used her pain to move a room. She sat because she wished to sit. She touched the keys because they belonged to music, and music belonged to her. The first notes rose gently into the dark. Not the lullaby this time. Something new. Tentative at first. Searching. Then steadier. A melody with grief still inside it, but no longer trapped there. A melody that made room for sorrow without surrendering to it. A melody that felt like the beginning of a life no one else would script for her again. Tendai stood nearby, one hand over his mouth, tears coming without shame. He did not hide them. He did not apologize for them. When the music ended, Nala lifted her face toward where she felt him standing. "Father." The word nearly undid him. "Yes. Stay." He crossed the room immediately. "I'm here," he said. And when she reached for him, he took both her hands in his, as though accepting the most sacred responsibility of his life. Outside, wind moved softly through the acacia trees. Somewhere beyond the hill, the city continued in all its noise and hunger and injustice. But inside the old house, something long buried had finally been given back its right name. Not empire, not inheritance, not bloodline. Love chosen properly at last. After everything, the deepest lesson was not that evil exists. Everyone knows that. The deeper lesson is that evil often disguises itself as practicality, status control, or necessary sacrifice. It asks us to believe that the vulnerable are burdens, that broken people should be hidden, and that power matters more than compassion. But the truth is the opposite. A society reveals its soul by how it treats the child who cannot fight back the wounded person, who cannot perform strength, and the forgotten life that brings no advantage. Nala's story reminds us that dignity does not disappear because someone is poor, blind, orphaned, or silenced. Worth is not reduced by suffering, and love that arrives late can still save what hatred tried to bury. Justice may not return lost years, but it can stop cruelty from writing the ending. If this story touched you, tell us what part stayed in your heart the longest. And where are you watching from tonight? Share your country and local time in the comments. If you believe stories about truth, justice, and healing still matter, subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.